Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Glass Floor. Now, this is going to be a little bit different from some of the other videos you've seen. Usually there is Tim and myself here. Tim's currently on a trip, and this is something we've sort of talked about for a while, which is a little section where I get to interview people, both young and old, to bring different perspectives with different struggles, with their fights, and with what they're doing within the men's issues kind of community. And of course, as always, with the glass floor being the way it is, seeing how gender equalism can find its way in here. So, if you will, this is the Chicky Youngster Interview Edition. With that, I would like to introduce our first interview of this edition, which is William Saramac. He comes from Riverside, California, and he has a very interesting tale that sort of ties into a topic that we've been discussing for a while, on the topic of fatherlessness, of family courts, of the struggle of parental alienation, and just the general struggle of parents that are fighting about their children. William currently is in the battle for his own kid and has been currently protesting against the unfair court system in Riverside. So, with that, welcome and thank you for being on, William.
Thank you for having me.
So, how did you sort of first come about, sort of getting into men's issues and basically what's your tale?
Well, I've always kind of been somewhat aware of men's issues, but you really don't fully grasp it till something happens to you personally.
Mm,
So I knew the courts were not favorable to fathers or men, um, even before this all started. But I was just taken by just how extremely biased it is. Um, and it's just overbearing. You just can't overcome it. There's just nothing you can do.
yeah, that's a lot of there's a lot of bias sometimes in the courts, and I know a lot of people brought up different issues where there's corrupt judges. Sometimes it's just, a lot of paperwork and things going on. Um, I think you've met him once. Chris Felder once told me he's like, there's like a billion stories that are like of different horror stories in family court.
Yeah, as I've been protesting, I've seen so many men come up to me that are just completely broken, crying. Their stories are all different, but they're all hell.
Hmm.
Um, there's a lot of really broken men out there now.
Yeah, and it's sort of, and we can talk about this later on, because obviously we want to focus first and foremost on sort of hearing you out, your story, what you've been doing. But this is something we can bring up is how this might be starting to discourage the current generation from wanting to be fathers. Um, and because I know there's a huge mention right now about the drop in population, but a big part of it might just be this discouragement from the courts because guys don't want to be sued tooth and nail in family court and they don't want their kids taken away.
Yeah, there's no benefit to men anymore to being married. It's all expense. There's no benefits to it. So I understand it, but it's sad because men want to have children and families just like women do. The problem is the power dynamic is so off now, where I think 50 years ago, everyone would have been very satisfied with everyone being equal.
Mhm.
That's no longer the case. I don't think my experience is that a lot. Well, it's different than a lot of people's, but not different in a lot of ways too. Um,
Mhm.
there's just no, there's nothing in it for marriage anymore. There's nothing in it for the kids. I think we're all suffering. It's men are suffering, women are suffering.
Yeah. Um, and something we could bring up later, and this is something I want to say this was the episode we ended up talking about the girl boss a little bit, but Tim and I had brought up in one episode how it was interesting that feminism was this movement that seemed like it was supposed to, help women gain jobs and was like about their voting rights and this and that, and it's now turned in it feminism says they need to tear down the patriarchy, and yet in their own trying to tear it down, they've torn down everything else, it would seem.
Yeah, and I think the patriarchy is kind of misnomer because it's very few men that are actually running things.
Mm,
Depends how you look at it. Is it 5%? Is it 20%? Somewhere in between who are really at the top? But everyone else, what's funny about the word patriarchy, it's the men at the bottom of the patriarchy, not really women. Because they were the ones who were going in the coal mines, going to work,
mhm.
sacrificing for the family.
Yeah, going to war. I don't know if
Somehow,
you sorry.
go,
I was
yet
gonna say
somehow women were able to put themselves in the position where they are at the bottom. I don't know. They were really more towards the middle, kind of sandwiched in between, the top guys and workers.
oh, yeah, no, I was gonna say, I don't know if you've ever seen our logo for the podcast. But, it's sort of funny you mention that because our logo for the podcast is a triangle, and that, top bit of the triangle is a money sign, the middle part is women climbing a ladder, and the bottom part is, a coal worker, a prisoner, a soldier, and, I believe the last one is just your regular everyday working man.
What I think is really kind of capsulizes it is I don't even think women are aware of men below that threshold. I don't think they even know exist. They really actually do think they're on the bottom, and I don't know how they could like. It's almost as if they don't even recognize those lower level men as people, or they perceive them as lower level men. Hardworking men.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it's in the media too a lot as well that I think gives that perception. Just shows growing up because you see a lot of these shows where it's like the secretary, the lower lawyer, um, and then all the men are successful businessmen. I don't I don't remember. I mean, I know there's some, but I don't remember too many telenovelas where it's a guy who's completely broke and a girl who's rich. Most of them is some hot, toity corporate guy who makes a lot of money and his assistant. Or the maid and the billionaire, etc., and so forth. I think that media sort of gets in their mind. They're just like, "Oh, we're and in schools too, and the way they're just like, oh, you're the women who are going the corporate world where there's so few of us, and which I mean, I'll admit in some parts is true, depending on your industry and company and other specifications. But it's become sort of this like, oh, supporting the female um, minority in workplaces. And so that sort of gives them this facade, if you will. This maybe not facade. I don't know if that's the right word. This false sense that they're completely at the bottom versus being somewhere in like the middle.
I
'Cause it
think it's best if both men and women realize that we all have our struggles.
mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's why it's called the glass floor. We always try to end the episode with saying, and all you need is for women and men to come to the table and to understand that they each have their issues, they each have their strengths, they each have their weaknesses, and that's just the way it is, and they just gotta find the best way to support each other given what their issue is, not trying to completely triumph over the other or say one issue is more important than the other one, because 'cause they're just about equal if you look at them, um, for the most part. I would say family court's one where that's usually more of a male issue. It's not always a male issue, but it seems to be more heavily male. Um, I know they brought up earlier that most states no longer, unless they're underneath a certain age, they no longer really have the argument that the child should stay with the mother automatically, but it still seems that in a lot of cases that is the defense. That they're closer with the mother, that they should stay with the mother more so. Um, I mean, you would have more experience with what happens inside a court probably than I do because you've been inside of one. Um, but with that, I guess my question right now would be, um, given what you see inside of the court, what would you think is like honestly the most outstanding issue that pops out to you? Is it just they're completely ignoring the fact, they just don't understand the men have these issues, um they just
I
are
think
assuming the mother
think that
is
they are
innocent?
over. I think that they're not delving into the cases at all. You know, I've been submitting paperwork for 6.5 years, and I don't honestly believe any judge I've ever been before has ever read the paperwork ever.
Mm,
Um, I think they look at you, they just see who's a man, they see who's a woman, and that's how they make their decision. There's really nothing more to it than that. And I think they're in those positions because they want to make those judgments against men. You know, I think the most bigoted anti-male people gravitate towards being judges in family court. I think they're there on purpose.
wow, that's unfortunate. I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean, really, that's unfortunate, and it's really odd to think about. You would think that's the one place that shouldn't be the case, that they shouldn't gravitate towards, and yet it
No,
is.
I think it's definitely intentional. You can't just make all these bad decisions and all these bad assessments unless you're doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Um, I know you'd mentioned I don't want you to have to reveal anything too personal if you're not comfortable, but I know you'd mentioned once in a meeting how they'd refused to, I'm trying to think of the exact legal terminology, but they refused to look over some of the papers that you had turned in to be viewed.
Well, though
What
they looked at it, they just ignored it.
Okay.
In my situation, we're talking about a situation where um, we went to court for custody. Um, I explained to the judge that I'm disabled, that I was abused so badly that I was bedridden for 2 years. Um, I gave the judge 2 years of letters and emails and texts to her parent and aunts, to my wife's parents and aunts, telling him I was being abused and asking them to intervene. I gave the judge two written apologies for my wife, where she apologized for abusing me and promised to stop. And I even brought her parents and aunt in to testify, who testified there were no signs I abused their daughter and niece, and that their daughter and niece never said she was abused. And after all of that, plus much more, um, the judge gave sole custody of my daughter to my abuser. Then, to add insult to injury, um, I protested in front of the family courthouse for 10 weeks with a sign that said the judge's name gave my daughter to my abuser. Only after those 10 weeks, they filed false charges against me and had me charged with domestic violence, even though I knew I was the victim. to punish me for protesting a judge. I remained in jail for 444 days. They refused to give me a trial. Um, I was tortured in jail because I require medication for my nervous system. And without it, I can't walk. And I feel like I'm being burned and electrocuted alive.
Mm.
So I was tortured for almost a year and a half, um, denied a trial for 4 years before I was acquitted.
Uh, wow. There's a lot of things in there I sort of want to cover. I mean, the first thing popping in my head is, isn't there, it could be different in California, but isn't there a law that dictates the amount of time you're allowed to hold somebody without a court
Yeah.
date?
If the person asks for a speedy trial, which I knew, you have
Mhm.
60 days to give them the trial in California. There's statute on it, and it's also in the Constitution of California. They
So
just ignore it.
they just ignored it. They completely ignored 60 days, and you were there for 4.
Well, not completely. What they first did, first the 60 days passed, so they rearranged me, which they can do. You can delay it with a rearrangement.
Okay.
Um, but then after that next 60 days was up, having never I didn't speak to my attorney for the entire first year I was in jail. No attorney would talk to me. They'd assign an attorney, but the attorney would never speak to me. So they had no idea what my case was about, except for what the charges were. After 60 days, weren't prepared for trial. So my public defender said I was incompetent and sent me to incompetency court. Now, I don't know how anyone could determine someone's incompetent having never spoken to them, but they did. Well, then you have to go to incompetency court and you see two psychiatrists and you have to prove you're competent, which I did. Both psychiatrists said I was competent. So then I go back to normal court again. And when I go back to normal court again, I have a new attorney.
Mhm.
Another 60 days passes without them talking to me. They declare me incompetent a second time. Again, having never spoken to me, the judge had never spoken to me, my attorney had never spoken to me. And I spoke up then in the middle of court because I'm in chains. And I say, you can't do this. You can't declare me incompetent when it's already been ruled I am competent. And then they would just go through a whole process. I've probably, through the whole process, had about a dozen and a half attorneys. They would just keep changing them on me and telling me, because we changed attorneys, we can't let your case go forward.
Did
The
any of
goal is to keep you in jail long enough that you plead guilty, which I was never going to plead guilty to something I was the victim of. It was never going to happen. And they just didn't understand that.
Yeah, of course. And you shouldn't ever. I mean, that is
But people do
within
all the
it.
time.
Yeah, that
The,
go
the
ahead,
rate
sorry.
of guilty pleas in Riverside County is 89%, highest anywhere in the country, because they just simply refuse to take anyone to trial. So people just plead guilty.
Wow. 89%?
89% plead guilty to their charges in Riverside County. Statewide, it's 75%. I think nationally, it's like 55, 60%. So it's extremely high for the whole, even compared for California, it's high.
Yikes. I mean, I'm trying to find words right now. What you went through is
Yeah, and
unbelievable.
they hang over your head. At one point, I was told I could get as many as 25 years. So they try to scare you into
Yeah.
accepting a plea. At the same time, they don't allow you to plead. And then in my case, they also took away my medication, which means I was being tortured. So I'm in extreme physical pain, being tortured while I'm not allowed to go to trial.
Yeah. I wish I could say the hard part about this, I wish I could say I haven't heard about that, but I have. They do that in much in California, they do that a lot in Chicago too. I mean, that's why there's a lot of cases in Chicago where we have people who 30, 40, 50 years later get acquitted for things that they never did in the first place. A couple years back, when we hosted one of our falsely accused days, one of the speakers was Jacques Rivera, and he was falsely accused. He absolutely refused to plead guilty, and because that he was in prison for, I think it was like well over 20 years before he was finally acquitted and let go. And there's a lot of other cases like that. We had trying to think of the name right now. Tony might know this, maybe. The corrupt cop who had um we had a corrupt cop who had managed to terrify multiple, like well over 15 people into pleading guilty for crimes they never committed just to make his job easier, basically. Um, and the unfortunate part is I don't think they found out until he was either about to die or literally had already passed away. So,
They also make the trial really unfair, and again, because they also try to get you to plead during the trial.
mm,
Um, like they wouldn't allow me to bring in any of the evidence to court that I brought in family court, not the written apologies, not the um, letters to her parents. They wouldn't let me bring her parents in to testify or her aunt. They didn't allow the jury to know I was disabled. I had to go on the stand before the jury came in because I couldn't walk, and then the jury had to leave. So they hid the disability um, from the jurors.
mm,
The whole trial is rigged. It's just the only thing that I got off for the domestic violence was because there was absolutely no police reports, no evidence, no anything. They basically presented nothing except expert testimony where they bring someone in who describes what domestic violence is like without the person accusing you of any of those things, but they try to mix it all up as they say abusers do this, abusers do that, abusers do this. And then it's supposed to mislead the jury into think, oh, we're talking about him, where they're really not. They're talking about abusers in general. So the whole system is set up for conviction.
yeah, unfortunate part of it. They basically just want to get the job done. They want to just put you away and not have to worry about it.
Yeah, with public defenders, you don't really have representation anyway.
I was gonna ask about that. So you mentioned they gave you a bunch of attorneys who were all, I'm assuming, public defenders, every single one of them. I'm assuming at no point you were able to get your own private attorney.
I had
Um,
a I had someone on a 5,000 retainer briefly, but we could never take it to trial on $5,000, obviously.
mm,
So that was just, for a moment I had one, but other than that, I didn't know.
and not a single one of these public defenders spoke with you? Is
It
that
took me 3 years before any public defender spoke to me.
3
3
years?
years.
Okay.
And 444 days of that was in jail.
Jesus Christ.
And Riverside thinks that's completely normal. Because I told judge after judge I was demanding a speedy trial, and judge after judge just rubber stamps the delay. And the problem with Riverside County is that the corruption is so complete that the judges don't even realize they're sitting in a cesspool. They're just not even aware. They think this is normal.
Yeah. Um, Not that I think this counts towards anything, and not that I'm trying to make this a statement. And not that I'm sure that you know about this kind of information, but how much of Riverside's county judicial system do you think is more feminine leaning, to put it kindly?
Well, I think there is an agenda with domestic violence cases.
Yeah.
Uh, because people definitely have an agenda behind that. I think it's more predominant in the family court. Um, the gender bias, you can really see it in family court. I mean, you see it just if you sit there for a full day, you know exactly what's going on. Um, it's not like one day is ever any different than another day. Um, in criminal court, it's not as obvious.
Yeah. I'm just curious because, to sort of tie this back into the glass floor and gender equalism, um, I'm aware law is depicted as heavily male in profession, but it has over the years seemed to increase in feminine influence. I've heard about different female feminist organizations, women's organizations who have been trying to fund for the change in policy about domestic violence, who have been trying to change the procedures of which they do these cases, of which on how they collect the information, on what they allow in or not, based on whether maybe it's triggering or whatnot. And I'm wondering if maybe that influence has such a stronghold in that county.
I don't. I can't specifically say it does in criminal court.
Oh,
Um, in family court, yes, I can say that definitively, but I can't say that for sure in criminal
criminal
court.
court, yeah. Maybe in that specific case of domestic violence, maybe not overall. Because it was just a thought process. Because when we were talking earlier, about women sort of being in this middle, men being the bottom. I mean, this is a great example where men are sort of in this bottom fighting about their kids, family court, they're fighting against domestic violence, and in a way, the laws and the rules of what it is and what it isn't, and how you go about collecting the information about it is being changed right underneath their feet.
Well, this is the thing, though. In my case, they had the information. They just chose not. They chose to ignore it. They took actual evidence and put that below just accusations that were not even specific. Just this general idea that I was abusive. Um, came after actual evidence of letters, testimony, parents, and that.
Yeah, which it should never do. And not that I'm saying it wasn't that way, is or isn't that way in the past, but I'm assuming in the past they probably would have taken that evidence into account more likely
Oh,
nowadays.
my case should not even have gone past the preliminary hearing. It should never even been in trial.
Oh, no, absolutely. It really shouldn't have. If you had all that, it just should have stayed right there. Um,
They put me in jail on over a $500,000 bail, which is just purely punitive to keep me in there. Because if you could take something to trial and there's no evidence of domestic violence, everyone's saying that it didn't occur. The evidence says it didn't occur. How do you put someone in jail for $500,000? That's
yeah,
more than murderers go to jail for.
yeah. And I don't know about California, but in Chicago, they've been contemplating no cash bail, taking away cash bail.
Oh, if you're a violent criminal, you can get no cash bail in California.
Well, they're talking in Chicago, they were talking about not just for like violent criminals, but for doing that even at lower level crimes, petty theft and things of that matter. And it's been discussed back and forth because some people think they'll discourage people from committing those crimes. But in other ways, people are bringing into account, well, what if you come from a lower class family and you were someone stealing bread? Now you can't afford to bail yourself out. You know, if you're someone in your case that was in family court, first of all, the fact they put half a billion is ridiculous, but had they given you something like 2,000 or 3,000 instead, you could have probably possibly paid that instead of them switching to no cash bail if that was a decision made here.
Well, they switched to no cash bail while I was in jail, and they still didn't release me, even though at that point it had become law that they have no cash bail
Oh, so that passed while you were in jail.
while I was in jail. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
To give you some idea, at the same time I was in jail, two different sheriffs' deputies were charged with statutory rape, and their bail was $20,000 and $40,000.
Uh,
And me as a domestic violence victim was over half a million.
did the sheriffs end up in jail by any chance?
Our sheriff is now running for governor of California.
Oh my lord. Okay.
Yeah, and I've actually already wrote him a letter. I told him that I'm going to get my story out and I'm going to make sure because I filed 97 medical grievances while I was in jail, approximately one every 4 days. I would file a medical grievance. Now, according to an old lawsuit, the jail had agreed that after the third medical grievance, it's supposed to go to the head of the jail or the sheriff.
Mm,
They refused to give my case to the sheriff. Um, and they tortured me. I'm so broken from that torture. You know, when you're burned, when you have a minor neurological disease and you don't get your infusions, it feels
mhm,
like you were being burned and electrocuted alive. And I went through 444 days of that mind numbing pain. And the PTSD I have is so extreme. The depression I now have is so extreme. I'm broken. I will never, ever, ever the rest of my life recover. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't do anything about what I've been through. And I can't overcome it. I'm too far gone.
mm, I know. And I'm so sorry that that happened to you and that these things occurred. I realize you can't ever get back to the original state. Hopefully, though, things improve a bit mentally and physically. Now that you have your medications back, hopefully you won't have to go through that pain again. But what would you say? I mean, maybe this sounds like a dumb question, but I guess I'm wondering, like, how do we avoid this happening to someone else in Riverside County? How do you stop the corruption? How do you stop them from doing this to someone else from our level?
Well, I've been petitioning our committee to eliminate what it's a civil, we have a civil rights committee. Every county in California has one. And it's a judicial committee. And our committee has 32 judges who are supposed to be in charge of making sure there's no discrimination or bias in the court system. The person who heads that committee is the family court judge who ruled in my case. So the person who's actually, they're using that committee in Riverside to implement the discrimination. I've submitted over a dozen times to them asking for a hearing and asking them to respond. They will not even acknowledge that I've submitted a complaint, and I've been doing that for years. I've gone to three successive presiding judges who are supposed to oversee the committee, and none of them has intervened. The whole political apparatus is pointedly to institutionalize discrimination. It's Orwellian. The name of the committee is the exact opposite of what its intent is.
And would you say if we replace the judges on the committee, or if there was maybe an accountability system to the committee of some format, do you think that would change some of the decisions being made and some of the treatment within the court system?
Judges never hold other judges accountable. A judge will sit in court and spend his entire life holding others accountable, but no judge ever takes accountability. They just don't do it. It's not even a thing.
Okay. Well, possibly if the accountability was done by someone that wasn't a judge, maybe a public
Maybe,
peers
but I
committee.
had mailed all 32 of those members individually.
Mhm.
And so, and not a single one of them ever mailed me back. And they've been mailed multiple times. I've pled with them. I've told them because of the head of this committee being the person who discriminated against me, I'm not allowed to appear before the committee, and this is being hidden from you. Could you please get me in? They won't even write me back either. Judges are loyal to each other. It
Yeah.
doesn't, you could, a judge could walk in a room and shoot someone, and all the other judges would just ignore it. That's how bad it is.
Well, I think for this section of the interview, I'd sort of like to leave with the note of I know usually our conversations on this is, how to come to the table and gender equalism, but I think this specific one, we need to talk about how to fix the system, the the and not in the system as a whole, but also just seeing how to change it in a way where they're held accountable and things should be working the way they are, and people should be following the law the way it should be, and they shouldn't be exploiting it in the way they have in your case.
Right? The problem is it's meant to be political. That's
Mhm.
the whole point.
True. And maybe we can talk about ways that we can find a way to maybe make it less political or make it maybe a bit more educational in this next section. But for now, for this part one, thank you so much for being here in this episode. Thank you, William, for being here for part one. And we will see you all on part two of William's interview. This has
Thank you
been
for
the
having me.
class. No problem. This has been the Glass Floor. This is a show sponsored by NCFM, National Coalition for Men, which was founded in 1977. They're a nonpartisan, diverse, inclusive group fighting against discrimination against men and boys. So, with that, we will all see you for part two. Like and subscribe.